looks like, he's just talking about the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. I just want to comment that, like, it's pretty obvious to me the many worlds interpretation is an attempt to hold on to what's known as physical realism in quantum mechanics, which is this idea that, particles do, in fact, have definite physical properties prior to and independent of measurement or observation.
Well, also, he says, we know that consciousness stops when the head is cut off or whatever, right? And this is actually what happened yesterday. You remember the woman who came up in my discussion and it's like, well, we know that consciousness goes away when the brain is gone, when you cut the head off, basically. And I'm like, oh yeah, how do we know that? And her response to that was, oh, haha, yeah, you're funny, goodbye.
Consciousness is not connected to the brain. Intelligence and certain types of behaviors are correlated to the brain.
He recognizes that in order to be heard about meditation, he needs to maintain his materialist, atheist, new atheist street cred that I talked about, and therefore he can have the most influence. And the guy does have the biggest non-dual meditation app in the world.
So Connor had a really good conversation with Sam Harris about meditation, about materialism, idealism, panpsychism, metaphysics. And we are going to go through this video. We have some timestamps here. Stash, you said you wanted to make some comments about like what happened in the beginning of their conversation.
Yeah, maybe even broader than that. Like, first of all, like, I think it's great the timing of like, okay, Alex talked to Swami Sarvapriyananda, Bernardo Kastrup, Sean Carroll, then Sam Harris. Like, he's hitting all of these kind of viewpoints that all hover around this idea of consciousness, basically, and how consciousness plays in mind play a role in the world. And I think Sam Harris, I was really delighted to see that Sam Harris was his next guest. And I want to say at the outset that Sam Harris is extremely important to me. I know he's a very controversial figure, probably always, but especially nowadays because of the political side of things. I don't care about any of that. The reason that I think Sam Harris was so important to me was precisely because I was an hardcore atheist physicalist before. And Sam Harris did something very unusual for somebody who is not only an atheist physicalist, but one of the most well-known, outspoken atheists, physicalists, new atheists, as they call them, of of all time. Because what Sam Harris did was he also talked about meditation and contemplative practice, and even calling it spiritual practice, in a way that for him had an enormous cost to pay by the kind of community that he was in. But critically, somebody like me, I needed to see somebody with his credentials, his atheist physicalist street cred, in order to be able to listen to that meditation might even be something worth looking into. And so for me, he was like probably the most important figure in actually what's ironic is my eventual, not only personal spiritual journey with my own psyche and mind, but my ultimate change in my metaphysics also. So I think it's really cool to see all of these people, Swami Sarvapriyananda and Kastrup and Sam Harris and Sean Carroll, and they represent kind of my entire arc. I started off as Sean Carroll, and I'm now like somewhere more spiritual than Sarvapriyananda, maybe, and I mean, not really, but I'm more along those lines, right? Yeah. So that's just to start out to say that I love that Alex is going to talk to Sam. And then I want to say, we're going to skip over the first hour of the video and jump right in to the point, because our podcast here on Reality Gone Mental has to do with metaphysics mostly and philosophy, which they get into, but they don't get into it before talking for an hour about contemplative practice. And I just want to say everything Sam Harris said about contemplative practice pretty much is just a very clear indication of his depth of experience with that, and like his knowledge about what it like how to describe it in a way where you like someone like me can tell, oh, this is a guy who has had the similar kind of experience that all of the mystics sort of report. And so I know, Alex, I'm sort of ranting here, but But the interesting thing is somebody with that depth of experience can still hold on to a materialist metaphysics that, in my view, also fall with the experience. And I'm always a bit mystified um, as to why Sam really seems to want to hold on to a belief system, a prior belief system that predates his experience. I mean, I have some, as you know, you and I have some theories about that. Maybe we can talk about that. But I love Sam. I I really appreciate, somebody called me, what did he call me? Dollar Tree Sam Harris or something on TikTok
Yeah.
the other day. But
He
anyway,
thought you were the ops.
yeah, totally. But I really appreciate Sam Harris. I am endlessly frustrated at what we're going to go over in this video today. So
Mm,
that's just to give some
okay.
preamble. That's where I'm at with
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna be watching this, kind reacting to it kind of like blind. I watched like the very beginning of this, and then I got busy with something else. So we'll see how that goes. But I also just want to add that like I really appreciate what Alex O'Connor is doing these days. Um, he's digging deep, man. He's
Mm.
digging deep, and I think it's safe to say, like a third comment, that Sam Harris has had an effect on you. I think you've probably brought him up in every episode that
Maybe.
we've done on this channel so far, which is then nothing wrong with that. I've just, it's an observation.
Yeah, it
But
was
okay,
seminal to my experience, like I said. And just to say one more thing, we're gonna go through these. I gotta apologize maybe to my co-host here in advance that the one thing with Sam Harris that you'll notice is that he's long-winded. He says so himself in this video, and it's very hard to like find an entry point to the little like clips that we want to react to on this because it's like a 20-minute monologue every time. So bear with
yeah,
us a little bit on the jumpiness of the cuts here.
it might be a little rough. I might have to fast forward or rewind and whatnot. So okay, you ready to jump in? You'll just have to tell me like when to stop.
Yeah,
Um,
and that'll
so
be sort of arbitrary, but yeah, sure. Go
okay,
ahead.
There's all this other stuff that is, if it's not going on in the dark, it's going on in the dark from my point of view, right? Even
right.
if my point of view suddenly becomes selfless and it's no longer just my, little me point of view, it's just the condition of pure being over here that admits of awareness, of direct access to a certain stream of thought and a certain stream of sensory entanglement with the world, but I can't feel the pain in your elbow, by virtue of having transcended myself or taken 500 micrograms of LSD or whatever else. Um, and even if I could, even if we were going to admit other spooky things into the conversation at this point, even if we were going to say, well, if I meditated long enough, I could become telepathic, right? And I would feel the pain in your elbow. Well, okay, let's say that's true. I'm not saying it is, but let's even admit that. There's still all the rest of the stuff that I'm presumably not capable of being conscious of there. All of that still seems to be in the dark somehow. Only materialism, some form of physicalism, seems to get at that difference, right?
Stop.
Which is,
Okay, so that conclusion right there. So all of what he said, he's what he's describing is, well, there's this dissociation. There is the fact that my mind doesn't have access to your mind, and it certainly
mhm,
doesn't have access to what's going on in the Andromeda galaxy, and it certainly
Mhm.
doesn't have access to what's going on at the edge of the universe, of the observable universe. So therefore, then this conclusion comes in. Only materialism can explain that.
Mhm.
And this move is not, well, it's just not true, right? I mean, it's a ignorance kind of that there's some sort of other explanation as to why your mental content is not available to me first person.
Yeah, so I was trying to understand what he was even trying to say there. Not that like he wasn't making sense, but I just wasn't understanding it. So okay, yeah, it sounds like he's talking about like this sort of lack of epistemic access. Like some people say like, well, if idealism is true, why can't I read your mind?
Yeah.
As if there's something about physicalism that specifically explains this better than an all mental metaphysics. Yeah, I don't think that it's just everything goes just because everything is mental. This is something we've talked about quite a few times. For some people, um, that's what they think. And I don't see why. I don't even understand where this comes from. Why is it that physicalism would explain this better than Idealism. I don't
Well,
get
I
it.
mean, so here's what I mean. Obviously, I think like the reason that he can say that is because look, if your mind is generated by the material that makes up your body or your brain, right? Then it makes sense that like that how could your body have access to my mind? Right? Because like your mind
Sure.
is these are separate islands of mind that arose within the body, within the brain. And so then this fact that when I poke your knee with a pin, I don't feel it, like is explained by this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the move where he says, but this is the only explanation, that's the problem. Like, no,
Mm,
it's not the only explanation,
mm,
right? Because
mm,
idealism has a perfect explanation for this as well that could be is just as plausible. In fact, is no, it's more plausible because
mm-hmm.
in order for you to go the materialist route, you have to believe in magic in order to do that. And he'll admit that later in the thing. I'm sure I have
Yeah,
the
this is gonna be good.
yeah,
This is gonna
because
be
he
good.
basically at some point says that while it's true that it would have to be total magic for physicalism to be true, that's not a reason to not to say that it's not true or
Mm-hmm.
to doubt it, you know. And look, he's going to make an argument that like just because we can't, maybe we don't know how it works, that's not to say that it can't be true. Um, Although you can't say that and at the same time admit there's a problem in principle with the whole idea, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we'll get to that later. So this first part where he was just like, okay, like there's this observable thing that I don't know your subjective experience. That means only materialism can explain that. It just doesn't follow.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. Apparently, this next clip is about quantum mechanics. If you're ready for that,
Maybe, or just like the interpretation being quote weird. Now I
it
hope.
just says yeah, weird QM.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Let's see.
that we have, and yet when we try to form a realistic picture of the way the world is on its basis, we get just nothing but weirdness. So weird that you got a bunch of physicists now claiming that to believe that there are, a functionally infinite number of worlds that are decreasingly like the one we're in now, where they're infinite copies of ourselves having slightly different versions of this conversation as the worlds get further and further away. I mean, there are physicists, including Sean Carroll, who I think you've spoken with,
Mhm.
also David Deutsch and others, who say, "Yeah, this is the way the world is.
Yep.
There are many worlds, right?" Um, and that thesis is perhaps the next most incredible thesis to the one I just sketched, which is everything came out of nothing. Right? There was nothing, really nothing, not even laws of nature, and then we got everything, including the laws of nature. Right? If ever there was something that should be hard to believe, it should be that. Um, None of this, I'll just point out to the uncomfortable atheists in our audience. I mean, none of this, I think, gives um, ammunition to the um, the theologians who would say, "Well, see, you've just given us the best argument for the existence of God." No, because I mean,
Okay, so he might be going into somewhere else now, but
Yep.
looks like he's just talking about the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. I just want to comment that like it's pretty obvious to me the many worlds interpretation is an attempt to hold on to what's known as physical realism in quantum mechanics, which is this idea that particles do in fact have definite physical properties prior to and independent of measurement or observation. I think if you give up physical realism, you give up physicalism as a result. Bernardo talks about this all the time. We've talked about this many times in our other episodes. And I think that it's very philosophically how should I say, unparsimonious.
mm,
You're positing the existence of unlimited trillions, quadrillions, maybe infinite number of unobservable worlds. Like
mm.
that just seems totally absurd to hold on to physical realism. But I didn't know what
Well,
you wanted
and
to
yeah,
comment on.
that's kind of what he was saying there. Like, there's a couple things. First, he starts out with like, we have to have all this weirdness, and what I want to point out first is that the reason the results or the theory and then the experimental verification of the way that reality or the behavior of reality seems to work in quantum mechanics is quote weird is because it doesn't fit in a physicalist model. And
That's right.
that's what we mean when we say it's weird. What anybody who says it's weird means is they say this seems to contradict physicalism. And the reason they go, well, that's weird because physicalism is definitely true. And this is weird. And so, like, right away, like, the concept that it's weird is showing what baked in assumptions there are to that
Hmm.
to have the idea that it's weird in the first place, right? So,
Hmm.
and he's kind of admitting that there, like whatever the we can see, it's clearly weird, the results, and then goes into to say, well, how are we going to explain the weirdness, which is what you're pointing to,
Yeah.
and what you're pointing to is that we need to maintain physicalism.
Hmm.
So shit, we've got these results. Now we have to believe in what he calls the most fantastical possible miracle, like the unparsimonious, as you mentioned, thesis, in
Hmm.
order to just not give up the assumptions.
Yeah. To make it really simple, Einstein called quantum entanglement spooky action at a distance. And this is because in a purely physical world, a mechanistic world, you would not expect to see correlations between particles that are potentially light years apart. Like it's just it doesn't fit with that model of reality. So yeah, that's what we're
So,
talking about.
so
We're
let me
talking
point
about
out
quantum
though too,
mechanics.
real quick on that exact point. Not to say that we're going to solve the quantum entanglement weirdness. Well, I mean, I guess I could solve the weirdness. I may not solve the whole problem, but the weirdness here, right? In our ontology, right? These are two. The fact that there's two particles is false. There's one mental process that's
Being
represented on
observed
the
from
screen of
different.
perception as
Mhm,
two particles. And so taking the two particles to be really two separate things is what makes it weird. That's
mhm.
not true. That is
Yeah,
separate things.
to simplify that too, the idealist says that there's one fundamental ontology. It's just one thing. It's also not a thing, but it is consciousness, right? There is one mind exciting in different ways. So when you look at a particle over here and you look at a particle over here, it's the same thing just being viewed from two different windows. So it would make sense that there are correlations between these things. It's like trivial under
Yeah,
this view.
and even off of the higher, the sort of largest picture of the unity of all things, just the fact that what you're looking at with two particles could be a single mental process, if you will, in reality, which is mental in nature. The two part is coming from the physical world, which is just the measurement of it. And so and so the point is that there's one process going on, and so it's not surprising that there's this instant correlation on the representation on the screen of perception. That's just because the one mental process is changing like at the same time, if you will. Now this is a little
Mhm,
bit uh it's a little bit talking in a relative world, not at the deepest ontological level, but the point being that what's represented on the screen of perception as two things that we label as things really is underlied by the
mhm,
reality of that being a single process. And
yeah.
so anyway, the weirdness here, that Sam's pointing to, and the lot finally, just to close on this one, he is pointing that to the fact that in order to solve the weirdness, we are making this unbelievable, pretty much religious claim about the many worlds, in order to keep our fundamental assumptions.
Yeah, what I like to say about idealism is reality is just all one thing playing out, looking like a bunch of different shit to different people.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all it is, dude.
So
Okay.
this next one, yeah, okay,
This
looks
is
like
about materialist default evidence for materialism.
let's see what I meant by that in my notes.
We are going to get to a completed understanding of the world where there's no point at which we have to rely on some kind of axiom that is not itself uh, self-explaining, right? We just have to we're pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps here, and this is where we're going to do it. That consciousness clearly emerges because we have it. We know we're social primates because we've
Yep.
studied biology up to this point. Um, human brains certainly uh, seem to be the locus of consciousness in the case of each human. When you cut people's heads off, it seems to disrupt their conscious functioning. Um, and when people are dead, they seem to stay dead, barring the resurrection or the return of Jesus or anything else that we've been promised but haven't.
Okay. You want to keep going?
Let's stop here. We can talk about this, and there might be a little bit more. But what I meant now that I see that was that this is the evidence that people present to us, and you're live every night, like the kind of things he's talking
Painful,
about,
bro.
as if
Painful.
like this means that materialism is true because here's these things
It's
I'm
the
pointing at
default.
that can only be explained by materialism, and therefore, if you're going to make some kind of other proposal, the burden of proof is on you to dethrone the default materialist position.
Mhm. Yeah, look, I mean, the very first thing he said, obviously consciousness emerges because we have it.
Mm-hmm.
Bro, what? That doesn't mean that it emerges at all. What are you talking about,
Well,
dude?
actually, and we would say we don't have it; it has us. So,
Yeah.
even this thing that we have consciousness is not actually the evidence that we have in our experience.
Mhm.
Our experience
Mhm.
is that we exist in consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And so that's not the data. It's not the data, you know.
And I also would say that, like, the data like he said, it seems fairly obvious that the brain is the locus of consciousness because, if you chop your head off, like, you're not going to be walking around doing much. And, like, yeah, of course, you're not going to be walking around doing much. But that points to that the brain is the locus of, like, behavior and
Mm,
intelligence, not
mm.
like subjective felt experience necessarily. The evidence just doesn't show that at all.
Well, also he says we know that consciousness stops when the head is cut off or whatever, right? And this is actually what happened yesterday. You remember the woman who came up in my discussion, and
Yeah.
he was like, "Well, we know that consciousness goes away when the brain is gone, when you cut the head off, basically." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, how do we know that?" And her
Yeah.
response to that was, "Oh, haha, yeah, you're funny. Goodbye, I'm out." Like,
By the way, we debate this on TikTok. Mainly me. He hangs out. He hosts lives as well on TikTok. I will drop the links in the description. Check
yeah.
us out. But
Yeah, so we have these discussions all the time, and that's what we're referencing here. That many people that aren't Sam Harris, unfortunately, come up in our. I'd love for Sam Harris to come up in your live. That'd be a treat. But he would be making arguments like this, pointing at this evidence that we would just so easily be like, look, you got to think about this, man. Like the evidence that you're pointing to and saying this is why we believe in materialism, it only has this tenuous connection. It's
mhm.
not incoherent under physicalism.
Right,
It's also not incoherent under idealism. It's also not incoherent under panpsychism. Like
right,
this does not
right.
give you some privileged position for materialism, and
Mhm.
that's the claim being made here.
Yeah, yeah. Given the hypothesis that consciousness is something that a brain has, right? This kind of evidence would be consistent with that view, right?
Mhm.
Given the hypothesis that a brain is something that consciousness has, this evidence would also be consistent with that view. This is the
Right.
problem when talking about empirical evidence in this conversation. This is a metaphysical and ontological, a philosophy of mind discussion. You can use the empirics, but to think that it like favors one side or the other is naive. I don't know. I mean, it's
Just
Sam
not
Harris. He should
thinking
know,
about
but
what the it will, we often talk about the radio analogy, and this is like the bane of our existence because people always misunderstand what we mean when we bring up this analogy. But the idea being that if you had a world full of radios and you don't know how they work at all, like we don't know how the brain works, to make the analogy clear, and you poked the inside of the brain or the radio with a screwdriver and you saw that the music has changed or stops completely, as Sam Harris, you cut the head off and it stops completely, or you see monitor the electrical signals and you see they correlate very well with the music. You just cannot conclude that that means that we know that the radio generates music, right?
mhm,
And so it's just to say again, we don't think the brain is like a radio. Got to make that super clear because everyone who hears this says, "Oh, you're saying the brain is a radio, like a radio. It's tuning into consciousness." No, what we're
right,
saying is that the data that's being presented as evidence that
would be
exclusively would be essentially only applicable under a materialist paradigm is
right.
just not evidence that does that
Yeah.
job. Yeah.
I mean, it's simple as this. You're saying that the evidence leads to the conclusion that materialism is true. But if I can take that evidence and it would also be consistent some other view, then you've made a conclusion that goes above and beyond what the data actually shows.
Mhm.
Your conclusion does not follow from the premises necessarily. It's that simple.
And now, like, that person that thinks it does thinks that I've got the default position that the evidence shows, and it now needs to be dethroned if we're going to move past
With
it.
empirical
And
evidence.
this is just setting up a completely bonkers scenario that's not true at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can probably go to the next one. I
Okay.
don't think you need to
Yeah.
go.
The next one says denial of death, idealism.
Oh, this is great. You'll love this one.
Okay. Here we go.
At odds with physicalism, seems to have in it a often unacknowledged motive, which we want to call a denial of death. You know, a rather childlike one. You know, so we should put on our big boy pants at this point and recognize that we're all going to die, and there's, you know, we may not get comfortable with that, but we shouldn't pretend to know that the universe is such a place where you know, when you die, you, the conscious entity, go elsewhere. Um, there are reasons to doubt whether these, you know, near death experiences or experiences on drugs or in meditation signal anything at all about the continuity of consciousness after death, um, because that would suggest that the um, the brain has no role in the emergence of consciousness and mind, right? And yet we know it has some role. I mean, again, its role in the emergence of consciousness is still hard to assert, given how little we know about the neural correlates of consciousness, or the, you know, again, how consciousness relates to the universe altogether. But we certainly know that mind emerges in some sense. You know, the content.
No, hold on.
Okay.
Yeah, we're actually going into two here. So I have two timestamps. I don't like, but the
Oh, I
first
see.
is actually supposed to be a
Mhm.
quick one and it started just a little late when you started, but it's okay. He basically said if you're an idealist, like that, what you're doing is you're denying death because of your wishful thinking, and you need to put on your big boy pants.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so I just want to point out that the physicalist, right? The physicalist says that they know that after you cut your head off, right, the lights are out, there's no further experience. And I want to just point out
Meanwhile,
I want to point out how comforting that must be that their dogma gives them every night when they go to sleep, that like they're not going to experience anything after death, and they can be very, very safe and feel very good that since they know that they're not going to experience anything after death, that you know, they've wishfully thought themselves into a comfortable position, and they pulled up their big boy blankie and can sleep well.
yeah. Not only that, but physicalists are the ones that think that we can upload our mind into a machine and become immortal, like merge with the machines
Right.
and get everlasting life. Like, look, I'm not offended. Like, it is what it is. It probably sounds like I'm offended, but
I'm
I
offended.
just think it's kind of funny. Oh, are you offended?
No, I'm not. I'm not. But what I am offended by is the suggestion that the reason you'd be an idealist is because you just want to feel better. So, I mean, look, is there something true that like I'll have a bunch of religious beliefs because they comfort me and like maybe they make me feel special? Yes, I get what he's getting at there, right? But to say that anybody who is denying, like, thinks physicalism is wrong is motivated by, you know, Bernardo would say this all the time. He says, oh, I wish I could believe, like a physicalist atheist, that my consciousness just ends
He's
at death.
scared to die.
Because
Yeah.
he says like this is terrible that like I don't know he said I have experiences on LSD, like he just commented on that were like fighting a demon for 100,000 years,
Mm.
like, and I don't know what I'm about to experience on death, but the fact that under my ontology there's no reason to think consciousness ends at death is not comforting whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what's not comfortable at all, thinking that I don't really exist as Alex, as an ego.
Mm.
That's actually like not comfortable at all. It takes a while to get used to, but
Yep.
so not
People,
only do I know that I'm going to die, but I don't even exist to begin with.
right.
That's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and people will tell you this. They'll be like, "Oh, your position, Alex, it's so self-centered.
Yeah.
It's like you just think that like because you know your mind is generated in your brain. So when you say mind is fundamental, you're just self-aggrandizing here. You're saying that Alex, the world exists with an Alex, right? And obviously this is like a sort of solipsistic misunderstanding and also a misunderstanding of what we mean by I. What is the self in this model, right? And because you
Mhm.
just said this I that you're ascribing, like I'm not. This is not a self-centered view. It's the most unself-centered view you can possibly have because the self doesn't even exist, which Sam
Mhm.
Harris, by the way, agrees with. There is no self, as he spends the first hour talking about. So,
Hmm.
the second part, and I think let
Well,
me,
let's start it over. I mean, let's go back a little bit,
you
if
could
that's cool.
jump back to maybe like
35.
11, yeah, 35, yeah.
Hmm.
Oh. In the emergence of consciousness and mind, right? And yet we know it has some role. I mean, again, its role in the emergence of consciousness is still
He's talking about the brain.
Hmm.
hard to assert, given how little we know about the neural correlates of consciousness, or again, how consciousness relates to the universe altogether. But we certainly know that mind emerges in some sense. The contents of consciousness emerge. Your ability to parse English language can be readily disrupted by uh, touching the cortex in any way, whether it's delicately in a lab with transcranial magnetic stimulation, or indelicately in a pub with a getting brained by some maniac with a hammer.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think, hold on, go a little bit more, I think. Let me see where we're at in there. Sorry. I just want to make sure it captures the whole
I,
thing.
I
Did he say
think,
already that we know for sure that it does?
yeah, the brain has a role in the emergence of consciousness. He's saying that we know it's involved.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But um, I think that
I think it's definitely involved in the emergence of intelligence and intelligent like behavior.
yes, yes.
But
So
to say that it's
it's what that
involved in
stuff
the
looks like, right? Like, so again, about the emergence, there's this, when you talk about emergence, we're already sort of in the land of these things emerge from the physical stuff. And that's not what we even mean. We just mean that, of course, the brain correlates with those, like a brain will appear in a situation where these higher level mental functions that are not just raw consciousness, but like other things like are existing or are shown, then they will correlate with a brain, right?
Mhm,
It's not really
mhm.
emergence in the sense that it's like, you could say this: without the brain, like you're not going to have, Windows 95 or whatever, or
Yeah,
Microsoft Word, or
it's the constant equivocation for me. I mean, no offense to Sam Harris. I mean, he's obviously a very educated person, but I think it's safe to say that intelligence emerges. I think it's safe to say that certain types of behavior emerge, and that strictly correlates with like complex nervous systems or, whatever. But
how
to
are you using
equivocate,
emergence
to
there?
equip, to
How are you using emergence there? Because like you don't mean it emerges from something physical.
no, I don't mean that it
Mhm.
emerges from the brain. I mean that intelligence
Late
is
stage
a
thing in the universe, like,
right.
whereas yes, that's what you mean. Like these
Yeah.
things are like, follow the story of evolution and
Yeah, yeah, I don't mean like emergent as if it comes from a physical object. I just mean like hierarchically, right? Intelligence is not fundamental.
right,
Intelligence is a higher level process that when you put the fundamentals together in just the right way, which is
right,
not physical stuff under our view. The fundamentals is not, it's just
right.
mental.
And that might look
But
like a
anyway,
neural network. Like you don't even have to say it's a brain necessarily for that. You could be like, look, like there's intelligence in the AI as well, right? And like so, like
mhm.
you can like
Yeah,
you
intelligence
can
is
point out that
behavior.
you just mean like that that all of the story about how well you need a neural network for that. Maybe that's true, right? Like it'll correlate always with something that looks like a neural network, right?
Yeah, I think intelligence is measured in terms of behavior.
Mm.
It's a third person measurement. Consciousness is not measured at all. And so, like, yeah, again, I just think it's safe to say that intelligence, we can talk about that in terms of emergence, not from physical stuff, but as a higher level phenomenon that exists within the universe. but to say that the brain is definitely involved in the emergence of consciousness, I don't think there's any data to support that whatsoever.
Yeah, and
That's
like
all.
I mean, he's basically saying that that we know that it emerged from physical stuff. It's just a matter of that we don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
there's some point, let's see where it goes, because there's some point where I really hope I clipped out where in where he says essentially, and it might be later, that that even though like we we can't, like, it seems impossible that consciousness could emerge out of physical stuff, that's not a reason to think that it doesn't, that it's not true. But anyway,
Yeah.
so hopefully
I
we
don't know.
get,
I went to 117 where it says
yeah,
memory formation.
yeah, let's listen to
So
this part. Yeah.
Uh, uh, a a hiatus in the stream of consciousness, right? Consciousness got interrupted, or at least there's time you can't account for, right? The people who didn't get knocked out, who were standing over your prostrate body, worrying about you, can account for that time, but you can't account for it. From your point of view, there's just this break in the continuity of your life, and or perhaps no break at all. There's just a sense that first you were there, telling somebody to stop looking at you funny, and you didn't see yourself getting hit, and now you're here waking up with a terrible headache, and there's no time elapsed at all, perhaps, right? Subjectively, right? So maybe there's just, to call it an interruption is wrong in your case, but we know from the external point of view that there's more to the world than that, right? Because other people are conscious of what you were doing on the floor, for the last half hour. Um, and so it is with general anesthesia, etc. But the problem there, phenomenologically or just operationally, is that it's very difficult to distinguish a true interruption in the stream of consciousness from an interruption in one's capacity to remember what it was like to be
mhm.
you, right? So it's quite.
Yeah. Okay, so we talk about this a lot, that like when people point at anesthesia or something like that, right? That they'll say, "Well, look, your consciousness stopped and then it started again." And Rupert Spira has well, one thing to point out is, like, you could say, well, how do you know just that your memory of whatever happened during that time is just gone,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Because, and so just as a matter of functionality, you don't know this, right? Like it could
Hmm.
be either one. And why are you preferencing that consciousness is gone? Is because your assumption that consciousness is produced by the brain, you've hit the brain, and now consciousness disappeared, and you want that to count as evidence for your assumption, right? But
Hmm.
just as easily, it could be explained by that memory is correlated with the brain, and whatever happened, and that's been suspended, and then you have exactly the same experience, right?
Memory and behaviors like wakefulness. Wakefulness is a behavior. Um, uh, Sounds kind of weird when I say it that way, but when we talk about somebody is awake, that means that they're like doing things. They're responsive. They're communicating. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that it's safe to say under something like general anesthesia, wakefulness is lost, memory is lost. But to go beyond that and say that consciousness is lost is a step too far. It's an inference that goes above and beyond. I don't think that inference follows from that. I
Well,
don't think it follows.
it's another case where the data, like, is insufficient to draw the conclusion, but we want to draw that conclusion anyway. And I think
Oh,
that,
by the way,
mhm,
when we say consciousness, we're just talking about any capacity to have subjective experiences whatsoever.
yeah,
I notice that like whenever they're like, "What do you mean consciousness is defined this way?" That's all we mean, and so it's totally plausible that when you're under general anesthesia, there's still some internal sense of experience going on. That's all
right.
we mean by that.
Right, and that we'll get into that later, because there's a really good, Alex has a really good rundown of like what we mean when we say consciousness, and people thinking that it's some complicated thing when we're talking about the most basic thing imaginable. So we'll get into that. I want to read though this thing, because it bears directly on what's happening here with Sam's reasoning about this, where he's talking about getting hit in the head and, quote, losing consciousness. Somebody asked Rupert Spira about anesthesia and like losing consciousness, and And he wrote this. He says, your question cannot be satisfactorily answered on the level on which it was asked, because in your question, the interpretations of the waking state mind are considered to be real. In other words, time is considered to be real. However, if we look directly at experience, we do not find an entity moving along in time. We find the ever-present now. Are you ever absent now? No, it is not possible to experience our own absence or discontinuity. It's only the imaginings of the waking state mind that say so. In other words, the absence of consciousness during deep sleep, anesthesia, or death is never an experience. Or we could say that deep sleep, anesthesia, or death, as they are normally conceived, are concepts of the mind which never experiences for consciousness. So the mind first imagines this absence and then seeks to prove it. Why imagine the absence of consciousness in the first place? Such an absence is never experienced. Only the thinking mind, which is by definition not present in such an apparent absence, says so. And because how can the mind know anything of the timelessness in which it is not itself present? It cannot. So sorry, that was kind of a long thing, but the point is this mistake is being made here with this analysis. It's assuming time is real. And once you do that, you've already made a mistake. And so then when we talk about losing consciousness, right, it's a story that we tell.
It's a gap in time.
On the gap is all in time. Like he talked about this, so some duration of time has gone by where consciousness wasn't present, but that's not true. Consciousness was present the whole time, if you will, because there was never not experience going on in your actual experience, right? Which is what the data is. So so this is just an artifact of our falling for the illusion of time that we see a problem here.
Yeah, it's like a post hoc rationalization.
Yeah. And it's based on a false assumption that time is ontologically real. Okay, so sorry, that's a lot, but like for a lot of people that won't land. I think like they'll just be like, "What are you talking about?" But anyway, I think it's.
I have faith. I think our audience maybe understands us by now. We'll see. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
that took me a long time to understand.
yeah, it's not easy, and that's not to say anything bad about anybody. It's just because these concepts. Most people are just trying to go to work, bro.
Yeah.
They're not thinking about this stuff.
And I just realized the irony of me saying that took a long time for me to understand.
Yeah, the irony. Okay, so this next clip is apparently like 3 minutes long. So
bear with it.
Sit tight, everybody. Let's go.
Much skepticism that because consciousness seems connected to the brain, and because the brain is the most complicated thing we know of, that consciousness must therefore must require complexity or be produced by complexity.
Consciousness is not connected to the brain. Intelligence and certain types of behaviors are correlated to the brain. Anyway.
And I was sort of snapped out of this when I realized, okay, and I've done this a few times on my show, but I've asked people to sort of imagine if I removed their eyesight so they couldn't see anymore, and ask, are you still conscious? And the answer is yes, trivially. Of course, I would still be conscious even though I can't see. I just have one less sort of conscious experience that's accessible to me. Okay, what if I also made you deaf? Are you still conscious? Yeah, because there's still something it's like to be me. There's just, I guess, a less rich sort of kind of experience. And then I sort of go through these and we get to memory. I say, well, what would it be like if I removed memory? And I don't mean in the sense of like having dementia. There's that guy, Clive Wearing, I think, with the 7-second memory you can find on YouTube, where every 7 seconds it resets. I don't even mean like that. I mean, in every instant, there's no such thing as memory. It just doesn't get laid down in your brain. So every single instant is like the first time you've ever been aware of anything. So you don't know language, you don't know your sense of self, you don't know that your hands are your hands. And even if you had the time to process that, it would instantly be gone and the world would be anew again. And then I ask, would you still be conscious? And most people say, yeah. But then I ask, well, what would that be like? It's really difficult to imagine, right? But at the very least, it seems suddenly like extremely simple and like rudimentary.
Yeah.
It feels like you would just kind of have this flash of data or experience or sound or light, and then it would just be gone. And yet I think it would make sense to say that that is a sort of an element of consciousness or an example of consciousness. And so if I really did strip away, as Metzinger tries to sort of get at with these reports, if I really did just strip away everything that isn't the same thing as consciousness, it's just some of the things that consciousness can do, what am
Mhm.
I actually left with? And it seems like I'm left with something really simple. So then I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, so then why is it that the brain is so complicated and consciousness is connected to the brain? And I wonder if we're making a mistake in that the things we call consciousness are actually just the things that consciousness can do when it's complexly arranged. Things like memory, emotion, sense of self, persistence through time, all of that stuff.
Okay. Yeah, you have down here, consciousness is not the contents of consciousness. That's what you
Yeah,
said.
so exactly, like, this is always the confusion we run into when people think about the definition of consciousness, and what he's getting at here to me, and I'll let you talk for in a second, but, like, what he's getting at here is that no, 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 no. We're talking about the most simple thing you can imagine, basically. Um, and and we make a mistake because we think, like, right, again, baked in is consciousness is this complicated thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I like to use this example of a hypothetical baby born with no sense perception.
Mhm.
No nerve endings in the skin, no, nose, no ears, no eyes, no tongue, etc. And I ask the question of, is there still something it is like to be that baby? But this example is way better. Just take yourself and start removing your own senses. And it just seems trivially true that obviously there's still going to be something it's like to be you. There's still going to be internal experience happening. But yeah, I agree. The contents of consciousness are not the consciousness itself. It's certainly the case that these contents are correlated to complex nervous system. I mean, some of these contents um, and behaviors and abilities. But that's not what we're talking about when we
And
say
so
consciousness.
what's really interesting about what you just said about when you start with yourself and start removing, that is self-inquiry in the
Mm,
sense of the meditative practice
mhm,
that's recommended by all the spiritual different practices. What it is doing is saying, look at what is actually real there. Like, because you'll start with all these things that appear within consciousness and you can start to remove them. And as you
mhm,
start to remove them, like, what that does is it clears away the illusion of the stuff that you are mistaking for consciousness, and starts to get out of the way so you can see, well, what is it really that I am? And his little, like, walkthrough there was like, what he's getting into, actually, he talked about Metzinger, and he's saying there's somebody that's tracking people who have had these actual experiences, because it's one thing to talk about it logically like this, and it's another thing to say, no, let's look at these and start to build a level of concentration in our mental focus that allows us to actually start to have those perceptions drop away. And this came up yesterday. We were talking to somebody where they were saying, no, 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 you have to have an object for there to be consciousness at all. And we were saying, no, that's not true. And what he's talking about is Metzinger putting together all these people's experience where they went through this process of training their mind to drop the objects of consciousness, and they report from that experience a objectless consciousness that is something that is not itself an experience, but yet, and can only maybe be talked about in retrospect, right? But confirmed that what you're saying, like, without an object there's still something there, and that's essentially what you are, and that is what we mean when we say
yeah.
the word consciousness.
Yeah, when we say consciousness, we are not talking about the objects in your experience. We are talking about that which is aware of the objects in your experience, not the brain, but that which is aware of having a brain. That is what we mean by consciousness.
Right. And so he's saying the mistake we make here, he's like, I think we make a mistake when we don't understand that we're talking about the most simple thing. Because when you think about it as this complicated late stage thing in the universe, it makes no sense when somebody says the universe is fundamentally made of consciousness. But if you
Right. Yeah.
yeah, but if you think about it as the most simple thing you can imagine,
hmm
then that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense that way. We're not saying that the universe is made of a human mind, like in
Right.
all its complication. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, this one's 58 seconds long.
It's like, yeah,
Mm.
it's the same stuff. that's ultimately very simple. It's just a really complex arrangement of it. And maybe that's what's going on in the brain. What do you think of that? Like, do you think that consciousness requires complexity? Do you think do you have a sort of hunch as to what a minimal phenomenological experience might look like? I just wonder what your take is.
Yeah, no, I think you have that right. I would say it runs in both directions, however. So you can say that you can have consciousness without complexity, right? I mean, the consciousness without mental events, of any kind, other than just the pure buzz of kind of pure being. Um, but conversely, you can have all of the mental events without consciousness, or it certainly seems to be the case, right? Again, this is now begging the question
Oh, look,
What
get
is
that
that?
last part. This is begging the question.
as to whether idealism or physicalism is correct. But
All right, stop.
if it
Okay, what he just said, you can have all the experiences without consciousness. What?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can have all the mental events with
yeah.
I didn't even
He's
track
saying like
that.
you could like ultimately, yeah, at the base, like when you strip away, all the experiences seem to exist within consciousness. And he says somehow this can go the other way. And you can have all the experiences within consciousness without the consciousness. This does not make any sense at all.
It's
And when he
totally
said that,
incoherent.
I was like, what? And but like you see, then he's like, then this is begging the question between idealism and materialism. Because what he's trying to say is like, yeah, have it either way. Like there's no clear causal chain here, or and again, it's not a temporal causal chain, but like the fact that, like, for instance, we often use the analogy that you can have the screen without the movie, but you can't have the movie without the screen. And he seems to not acknowledge that here. He's like, no, sometimes look, you can have the screen with the movie on it, but sometimes you can just have the movie with no screen. No, you can't. And so that's very strange, that what he said right there.
Yeah, I didn't think it made sense, but I was like, surely I'm like misunderstanding what
You're
he's
not.
saying
Like
here.
like how does he say that you can have it both ways? You really cannot have it both ways, and that is the hard problem, you know?
Hmm.
It's that you can't derive back the consciousness from the contents of consciousness. It's actually that you can't have it both ways, and this is the problem. So, I mean, I get that if he thinks this is true somehow, he thinks that there's that when he said is begging the question of idealism and materialism, what he means is we can't really know. So let's just say, call it even, like who knows? That I think
Hmm.
that's what he meant by begging the question there. But
Yeah,
I don't know,
I'm not sure what he meant by begging the question. I don't know who would be begging the question. But I guess to be maybe a little bit charitable, maybe he's just defining these terms differently because, like, what he said is all mental events can occur without consciousness. But according to us, that's like contradictory because mental events are occurring within consciousness because of how we define those words, and how we define the word like mind, for example. I guess it's possible that he's defining those terms differently and maybe it's confusing us. I really
I
don't
mean,
know.
he said that like you have this consciousness and all of the contents you've removed and it's what's left. And then he said you can have the objects of consciousness without the consciousness. And that's the part that just is like,
Yeah,
that's
that
like
makes no
saying you
sense.
can have existence without existence. It just doesn't, it
It's like
doesn't
saying you can have
follow.
particles in space-time without space-time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't
Exactly.
make any sense.
100%.
Um,
And I think the begging the question doesn't mean begging the question in the sense of like the logical fallacy. I think he meant
oh,
like there's just no way to
it
parse.
brings up the question.
Yeah, there's
Okay,
just you can't parse it either way because it could go both ways. But it's like no, it doesn't go both ways. That's the mistake. And this next is
sure.
like a riff. Like go ahead and start this. It's going to be on the same thing, and maybe it'll even clarify it more. Go ahead.
many people are uncomfortable with. I mean, it certainly doesn't fit well within an evolutionary framework. I mean, when you ask why would consciousness have emerged or or evolved in biological systems, you would want to be able to tell a story of it doing something useful, right? That there's certain things that can only be done in conscious minds and not in unconscious ones. But maybe that's not true, right? Maybe consciousness is just, whether it evolved or not, maybe it's just along for the ride. It's not clear to me that consciousness is necessary for anything. It's just the condition of it being like something to be associated with some types of experience and not others, right? I mean, if it doesn't require consciousness, I mean, to take the normal physicalist set of intuitions here, to think of consciousness as an emergent property in the brain that we can experience direct, the only thing we experience directly, and everything else is just not, it's just billiard balls that are not conscious, and their collisions are producing all kinds of effects that we're aware of, but those effects themselves are not subserving, their own points of view on the universe, right? So
Okay, he's taking forever to get there, but basically all he's saying is that it's conceivable that we could act, walk, talk um just like we already do without there being something it is like to be us. In theory, we could all be philosophical zombies and survive just as well, procreate just as well. I don't know what you had to
What
add to
I
that.
had in mind more, I mean, what I actually wrote down about it was where he says it's not clear consciousness is required.
For evolution
Right. But
or
it's not
from
clear to
evolution.
me that he doesn't, that whether or not he understands that without consciousness, there is nothing else. Like, what is it to say that these things, everything that's ever been experienced or found happens within consciousness? So, and I get that he probably didn't mean I mean, when you start talking about things that don't require consciousness, I often wonder, what are you talking about? Like, what
Yeah,
do you mean?
I mean, I interpreted that as him saying, there's no clear cut story on why it would have evolved if it's not needed for survival.
That's true. Like
That's
that's a
what I thought
different
he was saying.
level. Yeah, that is what he was saying. I don't deny
Hmm.
that. But what I'm saying, I guess what I was saying was, they made a statement in there, things that I wrote. What did I write down again? It was not clear consciousness is required. He means, yes, to be able to, like, you could be a pea zombie, basically,
Right.
is what he's saying, right?
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
like but the point is, right before that, he had done the thing about how the consciousness, all the mental events that exist within consciousness can happen without it. And that's where I was tying them
Yeah.
together to be like, well, wait a minute, like, can you talk like coherently about something that exists outside of consciousness, and like, what does that even mean, right?
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and I think that there's sort of like a tacit assumption that such a thing exists, obviously, right?
Hmm.
Like from a materialist point of view, like, and
Hmm.
there's just no obviously about that. In fact, there's no coherency about that as far as we could tell anyway. So
Hmm.
anyway, that's, I think, where I was going with that. I agree that I don't think you can make an evolutionary case that consciousness is necessary for survival, or would have evolved to help us to survive as a
I
species.
mean,
In fact, you could make a very good case that it makes it harder.
yeah, you can divorce qualitative subjective experience from behavior altogether and still draw a coherent picture. I mean, it's just not obvious that qualitative experience has any effect on behavior whatsoever.
I don't
Now
like the argument, though, because I think you can always make the argument either way with these
you can
evolutionary, like,
you
thing. You
can
can be like, oh, that's helpful for survival for these reasons, and then somebody be like, oh, but it's not helpful for these reasons, and then it
yeah.
justifies whatever the actual adaptation is supposed to be in the first
Hmm.
place, right?
Psychophysical harmony is becoming a big topic these days, but that's for a different
Yeah.
podcast. Let me share the screen. All right, so this is just about AI apparently.
it wa- it's totally conceivable that our AI can become more and more powerful, such that it emulates everything we do, consciously or otherwise, right? It can see and apparently feel and discriminate, our feelings, and read faces and human emotion better, and talk to it passes the Turing test in every conceivable way, and in ways we didn't know uh, something could pass, and it becomes superhuman. There will be this outstanding question: is it conscious? Is there something that it's like to be ChatGPT 7, that is now some kind of super person that can do literally everything we do better than we do it? And now we have humanoid robots doing those things. Now it's embodied, and all the robots are learning simultaneously from their collective experience. And we were out of the uncanny valley there, uh, and it's like Westworld, right? So they're really humanoid, and better than humanoid. Humanoid in all the ways that we would want them to be, and better in all the ways that we would want them to be. And let's leave the alignment problem aside, and let's say there's no downside here. We're just in the presence of apparent beings that we created, that are as are as intelligent as we are, or in fact much more. And there's still this question, this lingering doubt as to whether or not they're conscious. And then let's say they are, right? We still might not know whether they're telling the truth. Or let's say they
Okay, that's where you had it stopping.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out here that he is bringing up a valid point that there is no way to definitively answer this question
Mhm.
using the methods that people would want. And he brings up behavior there, and he brings up well, mostly behavior, right? And we run
Mhm.
into this all the time of like, well, like, or the other guy that said, like, he brought up at the end, well, maybe it'll say it's conscious, and then as if this is like somehow carries any weight to, we were going back and forth with somebody the other day about this of like, well, if it says it's conscious, then it is. And you said, okay, so whatever I make and I just make it say it's conscious, then that's the criteria we're going to use. But his point is that that because this is the case, or at least that what I want to say about this point is, because we will never have a definitive measurement of this, right?
Mhm.
It's very important that our metaphysical thinking is clear,
Yeah.
and so that we don't make silly arguments to believe things that don't have good reason behind them. And
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't say that here, but he's bringing up the problem that that how do we decide if this new artificial intelligence is a being or not? And that has to do
Yeah.
with deeper philosophical
Yeah. Yeah.
assumptions.
So the answer to the question, your answer, your opinion on the question, is AI having a subjective felt experience or not, is entirely dependent on your position in the philosophy of mind. um, because we cannot measure consciousness, because we cannot directly observe subjective experience, it's going to be dependent on whether or not you're a physicalist, or you're an idealist, or you're a panpsychist. Like, for example, like a computational functionalist, it would just be trivial to think that AI could be conscious, because consciousness is just the function of the brain. And theoretically, you could reproduce that same function on a different substrate. But with that worldview in particular, the question then becomes, does it make sense to say that consciousness is a physical process? Of course, we would say no. We think that's incoherent. We've got tons of episodes on that. But yeah, again, just to like hammer the point home, like you have to have some deeper theoretical understanding of what you think about mind, and not just take this on some assumption based on behavior. I think we're past that. I think the Turing test caught hold in sci-fi for so long,
Mm,
where it's like, if it can pass this test and fool a human, then it is conscious. I think this is good. We're starting to understand that that was like woefully inadequate,
right,
because it already passes the Turing test,
right,
and we're just like,
right.
maybe that's not good enough.
I mean, that conversation we had the other day with, it was Zach or whatever the guy's name
Hmm.
was. It just shows that what sloppy thinking can produce. It
Hmm.
can produce total incoherency. He was like changing, in one case, at one moment, his underwear was conscious of what was going on. In another moment, like a mountain split when a rock fell off and it became two consciousnesses, because the entailments of his view have to allow for this stuff. But it's all just about starting with, well, I really want my AI girlfriend to be conscious, because otherwise, like, this isn't as magic as I hope, and it's going to
It's
ruin
kind
my
of
life.
boring if she's not
Yeah, like,
conscious, dude.
sorry to ascribe motive in the same way that Sam ascribed motive to idealism as being sort of wishful thinking. But it's a little bit, you have to wonder when somebody starts talking about how they definitely believe their underwear is conscious, that what might be motivating someone to say such a thing,
I just thought of a terrible joke. I said it's kind of boring if she's not conscious, and then I thought about Bill Cosby.
Oh, geez.
He doesn't think
Well,
so. Uh,
yeah.
anyway,
Apparently, it's not a requirement for a girlfriend to be conscious, I guess.
it's
So I
not a
wouldn't call it a
requirement.
girlfriend at
We
least. Yeah.
shouldn't be laughing about this. Oh God. All right.
No.
Anyway. Um. Okay. Are you good on that topic
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
specifically?
Yeah, I
This
just
looks
wanted to
like our
bring up
final
that he's
clip.
pointing out the problem there.
Okay, so look, if you guys are still, this is our last clip. But if you guys are still here with us, I would really appreciate you subscribing to the channel. Again, we're gonna drop our links to TikTok and all that kind of stuff We'll drop the link to Alex O'Connor's channel and this original video, Sam Harris's channel, and all that kind of stuff. We're a brand new channel ourselves, and so we could use as many subscribers as possible. I really appreciate it. Here we go.
Matt Singer's book, The Elephant and the Blind, which
Yeah.
is this compilation of the experiences he's reported over this massive survey. He tries to take these minimal phenomenal experiences and sort of group them into themes that roughly crop up. There's some really interesting common threads that people have. So, for example, it's things you might imagine. People
Is he talking about near-death experiences?
No, he's talking. Sorry, like, I probably would have had to clip back just one more second, but he's basically talking about this book that this guy is sort of cataloging people that have had these meditative experiences where they get down to what they call a state of pure consciousness of subject without object. And he's saying like that this simple experience is then described, and he's talking about how people describe that.
Okay, let's keep going.
very, very regularly report being at peace. They feel connected, but also quite specific things. Like there's this phrase, there is nothing left to do. That seemed to be a common feature of these experiences. When having those moments, there was this overwhelming feeling that there's nothing more to do. And Metzing is actually a little bit sort of scared of this because it might give people the impression that we don't need to solve climate change or whatever, because you're just in your sort of Zen blissful state. But it's interesting. There's also this feeling of coming home, which initially, it immediately begins to sound quite theological, right? It's like you're coming home to this spiritual truth, but that is just what people reported when they had this experience. So yeah, it's like by toning down the white noise in the brain, as you described it earlier, you are sort of just cleansing the sort of the real thing at the core, and it typically comes along with this intensified experience of goodness and propriety, which is interesting. Just as
I think that was it.
Perfect stop, because what sucks here in the podcast, and I mean, not to criticize Alex O'Connor, is that he just let Sam pivot off, or not this. I would have liked to hear what Sam had to say about that, but but because you wanted to talk about something else earlier and he moved on. The reason I wanted to clip that section though is because one, just personally for me, and what's interesting is Sam Harris is nodding along there and going, yep, like I know what you're talking about. They're referencing something with these phrases like coming home or nothing to do or peace that everyone tries to talk about, like that has these experiences, that never communicate it to anybody who doesn't know what they're talking about, because like it's just a description. But those phrases do resonate with this like connectedness, like even the metaphysical idea that like what we actually are is this simple thing that we all share, and that's just obvious experientially once you see through the illusion that all that's left is this. What's home here? Home is where you started, which is fundamental to your existence and not separate from anything else, right? And so I just think it is true that if you, like he says, this guy is like compiling these reports of this type of experience and looking for common threads. It's just true that people are reporting the same thing, the same. When they investigate the fundamental nature of mind, they find these same things. And then the other little comment I wanted to jump on was when he said this kind of scares the guy that's putting this together, because the whole "there's nothing to do" might imply that like we don't care about the world anymore, like in this very religious kind of way of like, oh, it's all just about what happens after death anyway, so who cares what happens here in this temporary bullshit stage of thing. And what I want to say is that there's no reason to fear that, because also included in that connectedness is everything, is the whole illusion, right? And it's not that it like makes you not care about the suffering in the world. It makes you uber sensitive to the suffering in the world and how you behave as an apparent character in this dream we call physical reality. It makes you more careful to take care of the environment, more careful to treat people well, right? So not it doesn't turn you into a nihilist. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that that all of that tracks very well with my own experience and very well with the entailments of idealism.
Yeah, look, if I were to add anything to that, I would just not do it any justice. I think that was really well said. I think it's probably a perfect place to end it, man. What do you think?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I just say at the close too, like, as much as I'm criticizing Sam with the sort of what I see as sticking to materialism, and maybe we can talk about this to close at the end, not to ascribe motive again, but I think it's very natural. Like, I think there's definitely a real thing that there's sort of a church of physicalism in our modern Western culture where you become a heretic and you are sort of excommunicated from the church. And Sam Harris certainly plays in this. Sam Harris is in the clergy, you know. I mean, he's fully connected into that kind of world where you start making the wrong kind of noises and you lose your credibility with a lot of the audience. And look, I say for myself, I needed Sam to have that credibility in order to listen to him about meditation. So maybe it's good that he's, you know, not sort of blowing the materialist, you know, doing a full Castrop, let's
It's
say.
bad enough that his wife is doing it.
Oh yeah, he talks about that in here too in another section. He's like, my wife will make these crazy idealist noises. And I have to deal with that at home, you know. But look, I mean, he's more like saying like, if I do that, like, you know, Sean Carroll is not going to talk to me anymore, and I want Sean Carroll to talk to me, so I'm not going to do that. But I don't think it's. And again, I'm not ascribing like. I mean, I've told you before. I have this fantasy that this is like a double agent situation where like he's like, well, he recognizes that in order to be heard about meditation, he needs to maintain his materialist, atheist, new atheist street cred that I talked about. And therefore he can have the most influence. And the guy does have the biggest non-dual meditation app in the world, you know? So maybe it's all, you know, a very well thought out stance that he has to push meditation and push the importance of spiritual practice, which he obviously values. So with that, I wish him the best, and I really like have a warm place in my heart and I owe Sam Harris a debt of gratitude. So as much as I like laughed at him a little bit in this one, I really
Yeah, he's cool.
think he's cool.
I like him better than Sean Carroll. So I don't care if he ever talks to Sean Carroll ever again.
I concur.
All right, peace out. Hey, if you are still watching this and you made it all the way to the end and you're not subscribed, what are you even doing with your life? Goodbye, everybody. Love you.
You.